Welcome back to the Daily Brief on Metro Milwaukee's health and the economy, brought to you by the Medical College of Wisconsin and the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce. I'm Tim Sheehy, president of the MMAC, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. John Raymond, president of the Medical College of Wisconsin. Each day at 3:30, we deliver a 19-minute fact-filled update on the health and economic impacts of COVID-19. This webcast is powered by Aurora WDC. Our special guest today is DEANNA TILLISCH, president of the United Performing Arts Funds, and she'll be here with us to share the impact of COVID-19 on the arts and cultural economy. But let's start, as we do every day, with an update on our health picture from Dr. Raymond.
Thanks, Tim, and good afternoon, everyone. If we could go to this scorecard, thank you. Today, there were 70 new COVID-19 positive tests in Milwaukee and 225 in Wisconsin. And I'm concerned by the 225 number because it's a very large jump compared to the numbers we've seen over the last 2 weeks. The average daily growth rates calculated using all of the data since March 12th continue to improve to 5.4% in Milwaukee and 6.2% in Wisconsin. And the 7-day average daily growth rate improved slightly in Milwaukee to 3% and remained stable in Wisconsin at 3.8%. Now, we have made slow progress toward mitigating the spread of COVID-19, and we do hope that that's durable. The doubling times also continue to improve to about 12.8 days in Milwaukee and 11.2 days in Wisconsin. Previously, I promised to show you some information suggesting that Milwaukee might be doing better than the rest of the state. And frequent participants in our daily briefing have noticed that Milwaukee has had slightly favorable trends compared to Wisconsin for doubling time and percentage of daily new cases for the last week or two. And the next slide tracks our average daily doubling times since March 12th. Now, starting from the left side of the graph, Milwaukee, shown in pink, started out with a shorter doubling time than in Wisconsin, shown in light teal. The lines converged in early April and began to separate favorably for Milwaukee over the last week. Now, because the Milwaukee numbers are also included in the state totals, the difference between Milwaukee and the rest of the state is probably even larger than what is shown on the slide. Next slide, please. Now, there's more evidence that will require me to introduce a new concept of COVID-19 trajectory. Essentially, this is another way of looking at the growth rate of COVID-19. And the idea has been championed by Atish Bhatia at the web link shown at the bottom of the slide. And I would encourage you, if you're interested, to take a look there. Essentially, the idea is to plot total new cases within the last 7 days, shown on the vertical axis, against total cases, which are shown on the horizontal axis. And the data are plotted using a logarithmic scale to make the trajectories more obvious. And a downward trend is good because it means that the spread of the virus has slowed down. Now, this slide shows examples of COVID-19 trajectories from various countries. And as you can see, countries that have had some success in containing the virus, like Australia, South Korea, and China, toward the middle of the screen, had a very rapid decrease in the trajectory of new cases. Whereas countries that are still struggling, like Italy, Spain, and the US, shown on the right side of the screen, have barely begun to see a decrease in the trajectory of COVID-19. Next slide, please. This next slide shows the same data that can be plotted for states in the US. Now, it should be obvious that none of the states in the US have shown a rapid reduction in the trajectory of the pandemic like we saw in China. Although there are small positive trends, perhaps most obvious in Wisconsin, at least in terms of an early slowing of the growth. But it's clear that we still have much work to do if we want to go down the same path as China and South Korea. Now, if I could go to the next slide for the punchline, please. This analysis was performed by Joey Gignac and Dr. Amin Bamanian, and it shows the trajectories for Milwaukee County and for the rest of the state, excluding Milwaukee County. As you can see from the trend lines, Milwaukee in pink seems to be bending down the trajectory curve better than the rest of the state, shown in light teal color. Now, I'd like to caution about reading too much into a single type of analysis, but I did think that these data were intriguing, especially when coupled with the trends that we showed for the doubling rates. Now, in the interest of time, I won't show the health and safety indicators today because those haven't changed. The number of COVID-19 cases and hospital ICU and ventilator capacity remain yellow, and the testing and PPE are still in the red, although there are some signs of progress in both. So thanks again for your attention, and I'll turn it back over to Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Raymond. Very interesting way to look at the data. And as you keep coaching us each time we're on, it's not a single data point. What we want to do is follow a trend. And this is a really interesting way, I think, to look at the trends as we start to make decisions about potentially coming back online at some point in the future.
Yeah, that's right, Tim. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'd like to bring in our second guest here, DEANNA TILLISCH, who is the president and CEO of the United Performing Arts Fund. And DEANNA has done a great job leading that organization and will continue to do so through September and into the early part of next year. So we're catching you a bit on your swan song, and as we talked earlier, probably not the way you thought this was going to roll out, but I don't think we could have a better person in a position as we go through this crisis. So DEANNA, I know one of the things that you've done recently is take a look at the impact of COVID-19 on the cultural and arts community, and I think we'd be very interested to hear kind of the findings of how this has impacted an important part of our economy.
Great. Well, thanks, Tim, and thanks for your kind words. I don't think any of us predicted this type of a situation. But yes, we've been looking at the impact of COVID-19 on not only the UPAF member groups, but also just as a sector. Imagine MKE, which is like the Chamber of Commerce for Arts and Culture, has been looking just from the broader perspective, and then we drill down into what the performing arts are experiencing. What I can tell you is that when we look at the arts and cultural sector, it's getting hit very, very hard, as you can imagine. We need this sector right now probably more than we ever have, because we need to have spiritually to have our spirits lifted. The future of Milwaukee is critically important to all of us, and arts and culture can play a material role in helping us to climb out of this pandemic and get back to a strong, vibrant city. And what I mean by that is when you look at what the arts and cultural sector does for the southeastern Wisconsin region, we employ tens of thousands of individuals from all different disciplines. And we also generate $225 million in expenditures. Unfortunately, when you have a down economy, arts and culture gets hit the hardest within all nonprofit sectors. And I just saw a statistic today, which was very frightening. Nationally, 44% of arts and culture organizations think they will not survive COVID-19. And our groups are feeling pretty scared right now. When you look at what they're doing in terms of the defensive intervals, you know, they've got a short window of time to be able to last without having the earned revenue that they need to be able to sustain themselves. At the same time, we need these groups. We need to be able to have our lives, you know, fostering inspiration. We need to be engaged. We need to be enlightened. We need to nurture our souls. We need to have hope. And that's what arts and culture organizations do for us. You know, they're a connector. They bring us together. We're able to experience live productions, going to the museum to experience art. Unfortunately, right now, we can't do that. And so my words of wisdom to everyone right now is to, as you sit in your home filled with ambiguity, is to lift your spirits by doing your own dancing, singing, you know, playing a musical instrument, because that will increase your endorphins, because we know the arts do that. They also help with our immune systems. If you're too embarrassed to perform, you certainly then can go on the MAM website, the Art Museum website. They have different podcasts, and on upaf.org, we have a number of workshops and performances, etc. So you can lift your own spirits. Next slide, please. What I can show you here is when we drill down to performing arts specifically, let me just give you some numbers in terms of the impact that COVID-19 is having on our 14 groups. Collectively, they are projecting an $8.3 million loss in revenue for the close of the season. Over 500 people have been furloughed, laid off, or seen salaries reduced. Some of them will be back because of PPP, but it's only until the end of May. You see that 509 performances were canceled. That impacted 200,000 patrons. Fundraising events have been canceled. And then we look at the children, 65,000 children not receiving in-person arts education programming. 80% of those kids are at or below the poverty level. They need the arts to be able to be engaged, to be enlightened. And then we look at our underserved communities. Over 29,000 individuals are not having the experiences through outreach programs. So these are significant numbers when you think of, these are just our 14 member groups. So, you know, what can we do to be able to change the situation? Well, it's going to be really difficult until we can get back into the theater or get back into the museums. In the meanwhile, UPAF is in the midst of its campaign right now, and the #1 concern of our groups just happens to be, will the campaign be able to raise the dollars needed? We are their largest donors, and so they're relying upon us for their own sustainability. You know, there's a lot of concern out there, and there are a number of our groups who truly aren't sure if they're going to be able to survive. In particular, because they are postponing the start of their seasons, which means their earned revenue is going to be significantly reduced for the next season. So it's I don't mean to be you know, the bearer of bad news, but it's a very sensitive time for the arts and culture sector.
DEANNA, do you see some best practices amongst the art groups and cultural groups in terms of kind of dealing with the crisis now and how they're moving forward?
It's a great question. So the wonderful thing about arts organizations is they're really creative and they're very innovative. And we have been impressed with how they have stepped up to go virtual. And so there are a number of different live performances as well as on demand. We've actually been giving them, we being UPAF, we provided funding to help them increase and enhance their technology needs to be able to go digital. And first stage is providing workshop materials for children that are learning at home. They're learning remotely. So parents then can be able to take some of those activities and use them at home. So there's been a pivot, and certainly a lot of creativity, a lot of sing-alongs, a lot of different performances that are individual yet can come together as a collective, but it's still not quite the same experience. And for us, the challenge is that 3/4 of our donors come through the workplace, and there's nobody in the workplace. And so what we're doing is we are providing some virtual experiences for companies as well. So if a company wants to provide something for their employees to give them a lift, UPAF can deliver that.
Thank you. Let's bring Dr. Raymond back online and we'll go to questions.
Hi, our first question is for DEANNA. DEANNA, you mentioned your campaign. Are there other good ways for people in Milwaukee to support the arts and culture community? Buying season tickets, gift certificates, things along those lines.
Exactly. So absolutely. I think that right now, in terms of looking at the next season, there will be a next season. We just aren't sure when it's going to start. But purchasing tickets, being able to look at ways to support and you know, donations directly to the groups or donations to UPAF. One way of just getting, you know, increasing the pie of what the sector receives in fundraising is critically important. I think just you know, being able to express the appreciation of the arts. Go on their website, send them a message so they know that that there's value and that people appreciate the assets that we have.
DEANNA, another question for you, and I'm not sure if you know the answer to that. Do you expect the new Symphony Hall to be completed on schedule?
That's another great question. I've talked with Mark Niehaus, and that's an unknown at this point in time. It will be open for the next season. It just may not be open for the first concert. And so they're hoping, but it's sort of a day-to-day monitoring to see how far they can get before they're able to open it. They will most likely postpone the start of their season. If that's the case, then they should be able to have their first performance in the hall.
Question for Dr. Raymond: of the 225 new Wisconsin cases, do you know how many were the results of meatpacking plant hotspots?
I don't know. I was actually surprised to see that it was that high today, but we can look into that. I suspect that that's a large part of the increase.
Another question: are there good ways for people to get specific data sets about infections from individual communities or individual hospitals?
I know that the Wisconsin Hospital Association and the Department of Health are working hard on that. And I think as we move forward, it's going to be increasingly important that we have those data available from a trusted source every day, and that we can get down to at least the county level, if not even more deep than that, in high population density areas like Milwaukee.
Another question for Dr. Raymond: are there lessons we can take from other countries that have reopened their economies and still managed to somewhat control the rate of infection?
Yeah, I think we're all looking for that source of truth and the playbook to reopen. Part of the difficulty still is that we're just in the first 4 months of the pandemic. So lessons learned aren't the ultimate lesson. In fact, I have noticed that the incident rate in China continues to go up, and it has over the last week. And they have a different culture than we have, and a different tolerance for government imposed solutions than we have. So I'm not really sure we're going to learn a lot of lessons there. Maybe best practices in the economic sector, just in terms of protecting consumers and workers, would be where I would focus my attention.
Another question for DEANNA: do you know if arts and culture groups were eligible for Paycheck Protection or any of the other government loan programs? And if so, how successful have they been in applying for that?
Absolutely, they were eligible for it. And the majority of our member groups did receive the PPP, which has been a blessing for them to be able to bring some of their employees back. Unfortunately, it doesn't apply for the individual artists. They're still certainly struggling, although Imagine MKE did raise dollars that individual artists could apply for grants. So there is a little bit of a cushion there for, but not all of our groups were able to get the PPP, and they're hoping that with the next round of funding that they'll be able to secure it.
Great. Thank you for everybody who asked a question today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raymond, for joining us. DEANNA, thank you very much for your insights and your leadership. And I guess we'll give an inside baseball shout out to Laura and hope she's doing well. And then as we come back tomorrow, we'll again have an update from Dr. Raymond, and we'll be joined by the newly elected County Executive, David Crowley. So have a safe afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, DEANNA.
Thank you.